In my last video, I promised that we would talk about database options, and I ran out of time in that recording, so we're going to talk about database options now with this new database that we created earlier. Database options are like switches, or if you want to think of them as properties, characteristics of a database that you can set in SQL Server. So for example, for a database like the one we just created, Karen Sample Database, we can tell the database to be read-only if we wish. Or we can set a database option that says only one user at a time can use this database. Or we could set another option, which really isn't recommended by Microsoft, that this database will shrink itself or auto shrink if we delete rows from the database so that it will take up less space. In order to set database options, using Management Studio, we can right-click on the database and go to Properties. And you're going to notice that when I go to Properties, the first page that I usually see is a General Properties page that looks like this, that tells me the name of the database, the size of the database, and actually where it says collation down here at the very bottom. Believe it or not, SQL Latin 1 General means that we're using English language, in other words, the English language character set. SQL supports many hundreds of language character sets. If I click on the Options word here over on the left-hand side, then I get the page that allows me to look at and set database options, properties, or switches, if you will, for this database. At the very top, you can see that the collation, the language that is supported right now, is SQL Latin 1 General, which is English. I have many choices here. I'm scrolling. I hope I'm not making you seasick, but you can see that there are many choices here. But Latin 1 General is the default here for SQL Server, and that's what we're using. The recovery model has to do with how the transaction log logs your inserts, updates, and deletes, how it saves them to the transaction log, and also how you can recover a database if you happen to lose some of the transactions. The choices are full, bulk logged, and simple. And just in general, simple means that none of the transactions are going to get written to the transaction log, so your transaction log will be as small as possible. What I've done is I have gone to Google and I have searched for SQL Server recovery models. There is an MSDN article that you should read that explains to you in more detail, you see simple, full, and bulk logged, about these recovery options. So once again, I went to MSDN and I searched for recovery models for SQL Server. I'm going to go back here to Management Studio, and I'm going to go back to my properties page for this database and go back to database options. And then I'm going to go down here to the grid so we can see the options that I can set. Now you can see that there are all kinds of different options that you can set for a SQL Server database. I'm going to talk about just a couple of the most commonly set options, and that is down here in the state category, way down at the bottom here in state. You can see that one of the options I can set is database read-only. And right now that's set to false. That means that this database is read-write. That means that it is not read-only. If I want it to be read-only, which means you cannot insert or update data or delete data from this database, then I can set that option to true. Also, at the very bottom, I can see that there is a restrict access option, and right now it's set to multi-user, and that means that multiple people can be using this database at the same time. But if I want to kind of single thread this database and make sure that only one user at a time can use it, I can set that to single user. Or if I want to make sure that only administrators or owners of this database can use it, I can set it to restricted user. if I set the database options and leave them this way and click OK, you can see that once I go back to my database interface in Management Studio, that it says restricted user and read only on this database. So that means that I can't insert, update, or delete, and I must be the owner or I must be an administrator to be able to use this database. Now, using Management Studio is not the only way you can set database options. You can also go to the code window and use Transact SQL and use the alter database syntax to set database options. You can see that I have alter database syntax here that says alter database and then the name of my database, Karen's sample database, and I've said set read write. And what that means is that I'm going to set the database option to read write rather than read only, because right now it's restricted user read only. So I'm going to execute this line of code, and when I do that you see commands completed successfully, and when I right click and refresh the database or refresh my interface here, you can see that now Karen's sample database is no longer read only. It's still restricted user, but it's no longer read only because I set the database option using the alter database syntax. What I've done is I have Googled the alter database syntax with set options in Transact SQL. I've gone to MSDN and I've looked up alter database set options, and you can see that what you can look at here or look up is all the different options, and there are more of them that you can set with Transact SQL than you can with Management Studio. All the database options that you can use with that alter database, database name, set syntax. So I can set any of these database options. Here's our little friend auto shrink that we really shouldn't be using. And then you can see here's read only and or, the pipe symbol means or, read write. Here's single user, restricted user, and multi-user, and so forth. So in addition to using Management Studio, I can also use Transact SQL to accomplish the same thing. So that's just a little quick explanation of database options, and we'll have an opportunity to practice in the classroom. And by the way, the alter database statement can also be used to, as its name implies, change the database and add files, change the characteristic of database files, and so forth. And we'll have an opportunity to practice in class with that as well.